You know that sound when a main bearing starts to seize? That low grinding that tells you the engine's about to throw a rod through the block? That's exactly what I heard when Zachary Morrison walked onto my factory floor in his $1,000 shoes. I'm Bob Sullivan, 56 years old. Spent 8 years in the Navy keeping nuclear reactors from melting down, then 28 years at Steel Point Manufacturing in Detroit making sure automotive production lines don't eat themselves. I understand systems the way a ship's engineer understands hull integrity. You respect the machinery, or it kills you. It was a Tuesday morning. Tuesdays at an automotive stamping plant smell like cutting oil and hot metal. It's an honest smell, nothing like the synthetic desperation radiating off our new director of digital transformation as he clicked across the factory floor in those Italian loafers. I was at Station 7, Line 2, adjusting the servo parameters on a press that's been running since Clinton was in office. This particular machine has a quirk. The hydraulic pressure drops 3 psi every time the ambient temperature hits 78 degrees. The computer doesn't know this, I do. I feel it in the deck vibration, the same way I used to feel a shaft bearing, going bad 3 decks down on a destroyer. I was tightening a pressure sensor, quarter-turn increments, when I felt those expensive shoes stop behind me. You don't walk into the red zone unless you're qualified for high-voltage work, I said without turning around, safety regs. Unless you want to explain to your wife why you're coming home as a crispy critter. Bob Sullivan, right? The legacy systems specialist. It was Morrison. Kid looked like he'd been stamped out of some MBA assembly line, smooth face, teeth that probably cost more than my truck, holding a tablet like it was Moses's stone tablets. He was maybe 25 with the kind of confidence that comes from never having a hydraulic line blow in your face. Systems integration engineer, I corrected, wiping hydraulic fluid on a rag that had seen better decades. And you must be the optimization guru corporate sent down to explain why we need to do more with less. Zachary Morrison, he said, not offering his hand this time. Smart kid, director of digital transformation, we're implementing a paradigm shift. The word tasted like transmission fluid. You spend 40% of your time on manual overrides. That's inefficient bandwidth utilization. We need automation that automates the automation. I stared at him. Kid wanted to explain to me that this 20-year-old press wasn't just a machine. It was a collection of patches and workarounds that had evolved since Bush Sr. was president, but I could see he wasn't listening. He was already composing his next PowerPoint slide in his head. Before we continue, if you're into stories about working-class folks serving justice to corporate know-it-alls, hit that subscribe button. Maybe drop a like if you've ever had a boss who couldn't find a socket wrench in a tool crib. All right, back to the story. We have a meeting in 20 minutes, Morrison said, tapping his tablet. All senior staff, I'm unveiling the roadmap for digital transformation. You'll find it illuminating. I'll be there, I said, as soon as I convince this press not to turn the next batch of steel into expensive scrap metal. He walked away, stepping over a coil of pneumatic hose like it was a snake. I watched him go, my gut telling me what every ship's engineer learns. When you hear metal fatigue in the superstructure, you don't ignore it. I finished the pressure adjustment. The press cycled back into rhythm. Thump hiss, thump hiss. Perfect timing. I patted the safety housing. Easy, girl, I whispered. Don't let the fancy man break you. But as I headed to the conference room, I couldn't shake that grinding sound in my head. I stopped at my locker. Behind a stack of manuals for a PLC system that went obsolete when Monica Lewinsky was front page news, I kept a USB drive. Hadn't touched it in 5 years. It contained a complete backup of every system in this plant, every patch, every workaround, every line of code that kept this rust bucket operational. I looked at it, then slipped it into my pocket, felt heavy as a loaded .45. The conference room was air-conditioned to Arctic temperatures. The old crew was there, Eddie Santos from maintenance, Big Joe Martinez, our floor foreman, Walt Gibson, who'd been running electrical since Carter was president. They all had that look you see on sailors when the captain starts talking about efficiency improvements during a storm. Morrison stood at the head of the table, PowerPoint glowing behind him with words like synergy and optimization and right-sizing. Welcome, team, he beamed, pacing like a caged animal. I've been observing for 2 weeks, and honestly I'm shocked at the reliance on tribal knowledge. He said tribal knowledge the way you'd say nuclear contamination. We have critical dependencies on single individuals. He looked straight at me. If Bob here gets hit by a bus, line 2 stops. If Eddie wins the lottery, our HVAC key dies. This is unacceptable risk. Eddie raised a scarred hand. Sir, with respect, the cloud doesn't know that the cooling pumps on press 4 cycle differently in January than July. The sensors don't catch that. We do. Morrison smiled like a shark. That's exactly the problem, Eddie. You're relying on feel instead of data. Starting today, We're auditing all senior positions for redundancy elimination. The room went silent except for the HVAC humming overhead like an old ship's ventilation system. Bob Morrison said, and suddenly I was back on deck during a reactor drill waiting for the damage assessment. Your role maintaining legacy systems becomes obsolete when we eliminate legacy systems. HR will schedule a transition meeting this afternoon. Transition, I said. My voice came out calm as a damage control report. Standard review, he said, waving dismissively. Budget optimization requires difficult choices. We don't need artisans anymore. We need operators who follow protocols. I didn't move, didn't speak, just nodded slowly like I was acknowledging orders from the bridge. Copy that, I said, using my old Navy response. He clapped his hands like he'd just solved the federal deficit. Excellent, out with the old, in with the new. As the team filed out, Eddie squeezed my shoulder. He looked ready to punch something. Bob, this is complete horseshit, he muttered. It's okay, Eddie, I said, and a thin smile touched my lips. Kid wants to see what the plant looks like without institutional knowledge. I think we should accommodate that request. I walked back to my desk in the engineering bay, surrounded by schematics and coffee cups that had seen 3 presidential administrations, sat down at my terminal. Morrison thought he was terminating an employee. He didn't realize he was pulling the control rods out of a reactor core. I brought up the system console. Fingers moved across the keyboard, muscle memory from 28 years of emergency shutdowns and midnight repairs. The kid wanted to modernize everything. Time to show him what modern looked like when the foundation disappeared. Status, backup complete. I wasn't stealing anything, just packing up my personal files. If those files happen to contain the only functional map of every system in the plant, well, that's intellectual property for you. I leaned back in my chair. The factory floor rumbled underneath like a ship's engine room.
Sounded different now, sounded like a system holding its breath.
All right, Morrison, I whispered to the screen. You want to drive? Here are the keys. Hope you know how to work a manual transmission. HR always smells like vanilla air freshener trying to cover up the scent of broken careers. At Steel Point, the HR department lived in the clean tower, the administrative wing that was attached to the factory but might as well have been on Mars. The carpet was gray, the chairs were designed to make you want to sign whatever severance they shoved at you just to escape. Across from me sat Morrison and Lisa Harper from HR. Lisa looked about 12 years old and terrified. Morrison looked like he was about to foreclose on a widow's house. So Bob Morrison began, leaning back like he was about to explain thermodynamics to a child. The pivot to Industry 4.0 renders your specific skill set obsolete. It's not personal, it's evolution. You're like a slide rule in the age of smartphones. He paused, waiting for me to be impressed by his metaphor. I see, I said. So 28 years of keeping this plant running with 99.2% uptime makes me a slide rule. Exactly, he pointed at me, like I'd won a prize. You get it. We need to streamline, and frankly, your contract is bloated with legacy compensation structures. Lisa pushed papers across the desk. Separation agreement, Bob. 2 weeks severance for every 5 years of service, contingent on a non-disparagement clause and full asset handover. I picked up the paper. 2 weeks for every 5 years, that worked out to about 11 weeks total. The dollar amount was insulting, minus $28,000. Enough to maybe buy a used pickup truck, nowhere near enough to cover the knee surgery I'd need from walking concrete floors since Reagan was president. And the handover? I asked. Morrison stood up, walked to a shredder, and picked up a folder labeled Contract Renewal, minus R. Sullivan. This was your extension proposal, he said, holding it up for me to see, but digitization is cleaner. He fed the folder into the shredder. The machine chewed my future into confetti while he smiled. It was theatrical, it was cruel, it was necessary. If he hadn't done that, if he'd shown 1 ounce of respect, I might have warned him about the thermal runaway protocols. I might have mentioned that the cooling system needed manual resets after thunderstorms. But watching my career turn into paper strips, the last bit of loyalty I had for Steel Point manufacturing evaporated like coolant from a cracked radiator. Copy that, I said. I signed the separation agreement without reading it. Badge, please, Lisa whispered. I unclipped my ID. The photo was from 15 years ago, back when I had more hair and fewer scars. Placed it on the desk along with my company phone and the massive ring of keys, keys to server rooms, electrical panels, maintenance lifts. That's everything, I lied. The USB drive felt warm against my leg. Perfect, Morrison said, buttoning his jacket. Security will escort you out. Nothing personal. I never take it personally, I said, standing up. My knees popped like small arms fire. I looked Morrison dead in the eye. Good luck with the modernization. These machines have personalities. Treat them right. Machines are machines, Bob. They do what they're programmed to do. Yes, I said softly. They certainly do. The security escort was Carl Anderson, kid I'd known since he was fresh out of high school. He looked miserable walking me to the parking lot. Sorry, Bob, he mumbled. This whole thing stinks. Carl, I said, putting on my sunglasses. Morrison's an optimizer. I'm sure he'll optimize everything. I got to my truck, a beat-up F-150 with more rust than paint, but an engine that purrs like a kitten if you know how to tune it. Threw my personal box in the passenger seat. Sat there gripping the steering wheel, looking back at the gray bulk of the factory. Smoke puffed from the stacks. Production lines vibrated through the asphalt. Pulled out my personal phone. Opened a secure app connected to a diagnostic node I'd installed years ago for emergency troubleshooting. Morrison's IT team had killed my company access, sure, but they hadn't found the maintenance account buried in the HVAC control subdirectory. Why would they? They were looking for users, not ghosts, system status, online, user, maintenance ghosts, permissions, root. I didn't do anything. Not yet. Just wanted to make sure the door was unlocked. Goodbye, old girl, I said to the factory. Started the truck. Engine roared to life, drowning out the distant hum of the plant. I was heading to my sister's place up north. Gonna drink beer, sleep late, and wait for the phone call. Because here's what Morrison didn't understand about legacy systems. They're not just old technology. They're the foundation, and when you rip out the foundation to install something shiny and new, the whole building tends to fall down. I gave it 3 days. I was wrong. Only took 18 hours. The first day after my departure was apparently smooth sailing. That's inertia for you. Heavy machinery keeps moving even after you cut the power. Morrison probably celebrated with expensive coffee, thinking he'd successfully amputated dead weight without losing a drop of productivity. But entropy doesn't take sick days. Eddie called me on a burner phone around 6 a.m. the second day, told me it started on line 2. Line 2 handles precision welding for chassis frames, robotic arms dancing around steel with millimeter accuracy, laying down perfect welds at superhuman speed. Morrison had pushed the big red button at 8 a.m. the previous day, routing all control logic from local servers to his shiny new cloud-based system. Seamless integration, he called it. At 10:15, the timing started drifting. Just 200 milliseconds of latency between cloud and hardware. In normal life, 200 milliseconds is nothing. In high-speed manufacturing, it's the difference between a perfect weld and a pile of expensive scrap. Eddie said the first sign was audio. The smooth hiss-pop of the welders turned stuttering. Then the arms started hesitating, waiting for instructions from a conductor who was asleep at the podium. Stop the line, Big Joe had shouted. Morrison waved him off from his observation deck. Just calibration phase, he said. The machine learning algorithm is adapting to workflow parameters. Let it run. So they let it run. At 10:45, Arm 4 moved to weld a joint that Arm 2 hadn't positioned yet. Instead of welding steel, it welded empty air, swung wide, and clipped the safety cage. Sparks showered down like a New Year's fireworks display gone wrong. Emergency stop triggered. Line ground to a halt. That heavy, expensive silence that costs $85 per second fell over the factory floor. Fix it, Morrison barked over the intercom. What's wrong with the hardware? That was his first mistake. Blaming the hardware. Eddie and his crew swarmed the machine, checked motors, voltage, connections. Everything green. The hardware was fine. The brain was scrambled. It's the latency, boss, Eddie yelled up to the observation deck. New systems lagging. We need to revert to local control. No reverts, Morrison shouted back, face turning the color of those emergency lights. The cloud is standard. Fix the latency on your end. You can't fix the speed of light with a socket wrench, Eddie called back. Meanwhile, in the server room, Morrison's IT team was sweating bullets. A bunch of kids who knew Python but couldn't identify a servo motor if it landed on their heads. They were trying to overwrite the legacy control files but kept hitting roadblocks. Every deletion attempt got denied. Error 403, forbidden admin rights required. Contact system architect. Who's the system architect? One kid asked. Documentation says R. Sullivan, another replied. But his account's deleted. Then who has the admin keys? They didn't have the keys. I had the keys and I was currently 200 miles north, sitting on a dock watching seagulls fight over fish guts and drinking beer that didn't taste like machine oil. Morrison stormed into the server room like a general whose battle plan had just exploded. Why is line 2 down? I promised corporate a 15% efficiency boost by close of business. We're locked out, the head IT kid stammered. Legacy partition controls critical timing loops. We can't override without root access. Hack it. Morrison screamed, it's just code. Brute force it. Sir, if we brute force it, we might corrupt the safety protocols, the kid warned. Whole system could cascade. I don't care, Morrison yelled. Bypass the safety protocols if you have to. Just get that line moving. Sweet summer child. Bypassing safety protocols on a manufacturing line is like removing the brakes from a freight train because they slow you down. Sure, you'll go faster right up until you hit something immovable. My phone buzzed with an alert from the Ghost account. Safety override initiated. Warning. Thermal limits disabled. Press 4 warning. Collision detection disabled. Line 2. I stared at the screen. He actually did it. Turned off the guardrails that kept million-dollar equipment from destroying itself. I could have stopped him right there. Could have sent a command to re-engage the locks. Could have saved him from his own stupidity. But he'd shredded my contract, called my life's work obsolete. Let it burn, I whispered, and went inside to make a sandwich. The real show started at 1:30 p.m. Morrison forced the restart with safety systems bypassed. He stood on his observation deck, arms crossed, looking like a ship captain steering into a hurricane while ordering the crew to seal the hatches with duct tape. For about 90 seconds, it looked like genius. The robotic arms moved faster, smoother, without all that bloated safety code checking positions every few milliseconds. Morrison was probably already composing his success email to corporate, calculating his bonus. Then Sensor Bank C on Station 5 threw a fault. Under my protocols, a sensor failure triggered a soft halt. System would slow down, double-check the reading, and if still bad, park safely in neutral position. Takes 10 seconds. Annoying but safe. But Morrison had bypassed soft halts. He wanted continuous flow, maximum throughput, Industry 4.0 efficiency. So when the sensor failed to report chassis position, the robot didn't pause. It assumed the part was where it should be and swung a high-torque welding gun forward at full speed. The chassis wasn't there. The hydraulic positioning clamp for the next station was. Eddie described the sound as something between a gunshot and a freight train derailing. Robot drove the welder through the clamp assembly, shearing off titanium bolts and bending the robot's main axis shaft like a pretzel. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across the production floor like arterial bleeding, hit a welding tip, and ignited. Fire alarms screamed as the crew battled the blaze with chemical extinguishers, destroying thousands of dollars in work in process with foam designed to kill electrical fires. Morrison stood frozen on his platform, face pale as printer paper. His efficiency boost had just turned into an industrial disaster movie. Hour later, the damage report landed on his desk like a court summons. Robot Arm 4, total loss $35,000 replacement cost. Hydraulic positioning system, destroyed $15,000 production downtime, minimum 18 hours at $85 per second. That's $5.5 million in lost revenue, not counting the equipment. Then the red phone rang, not the internal line, the direct line from corporate. Mr. Hoffman, the CEO, had a dashboard on his desk showing real-time production metrics. That dashboard had just flatlined like a patient in cardiac arrest. I wasn't there, but word travels fast in a factory. Office walls are thin, and when the CEO starts yelling, everyone hears it through the ventilation system. Why am I looking at zero output on line 2? Hoffman's voice boomed through the speakerphone loud enough to rattle windows, and why did I just get an automated alert about fire suppression discharge? Sir, Morrison stammered like a midshipman caught sleeping on watch. We encountered a hardware failure during the system migration. Sensor malfunction caused a collision event. A sensor? Hoffman barked. Sharp old bird. We replaced every sensor on that line 6 months ago. Bob Sullivan certified them for 5-year operation. That name was stamped on the maintenance logs. The mention of my name hung in the air like smoke from that hydraulic fire. Bob Sullivan. Well, Sullivan isn't available to verify that. Morrison deflected, voice cracking. Frankly, his legacy configuration may have masked the defect. We're implementing cleaner protocols, masked it or managed it. Hoffman asked, cutting through the corporate doublespeak like a laser through butter. You told me this transition would be seamless. You told me Sullivan was redundant. Right now, that redundancy is costing me $50,000 an hour in downtime plus equipment replacement. It's a temporary setback, sir, Morrison said, probably loosening his tie. We'll have it online by second shift. New team is implementing workarounds. You better? Hoffman growled like a diesel engine under load, because if we miss Friday's shipment to Ford, we'll be replacing more than sensors and robots. The line went dead with a click that echoed through the server room. Morrison slammed down the receiver, turned to his IT team like a cornered animal. Fix it, he hissed. What caused the collision? Why didn't the safety override work? It didn't fail, sir. The lead programmer whispered, pointing to scrolling error logs. It did exactly what you programmed it to do. Ignored the safety exception and maintained speed. But looking at the diagnostic data, there was a secondary command executed right before impact. The system tried to access a subroutine called emergency AALT v4. Legacy file, but access was blocked because we revoked permissions for the original author. Who wrote it? Morrison demanded, though he already knew the answer. The kid swallowed hard. R. Sullivan, sir. He didn't just patch the system, he architected the entire safety framework. Delete it, Morrison ordered. Scrub every reference to Sullivan's files, build new safety protocols from scratch. Sir, writing new safety kernels from the ground up takes weeks of testing and certification. You have until tomorrow morning, Morrison cut him off. Meanwhile, I was up north, skipping stones across the lake. Found a nice flat one, sent it dancing across the water, 6 skips. Not bad for a guy with Navy training. I wasn't obsessively checking my phone, but when it buzzed with alerts, I looked. Saw the error logs piling up like accident reports, watched Morrison's IT team trying to rebuild Rome in a day. They were making freshman mistakes, syntax errors, infinite loops, variable conflicts. Trying to learn a language I'd developed over 15 years without understanding the grammar or the vocabulary. I felt a twinge of guilt. Not for Morrison, he could rot in his own incompetence, but for the machines and for the crew working doubles to clean up this mess. Still, the lesson needed to be expensive enough to stick. Had to hurt the right people in the right places. I made another sandwich and turned on a Tigers game. By Wednesday morning, Steel Point Manufacturing felt like a field hospital where the patient was dying and the doctors were arguing over medical textbooks. Line 2 remained offline. Line 1 crawled at half speed because operators feared pushing any buttons. Morrison looked like he'd been through a blender, suit wrinkled. Confidence replaced by caffeine-fueled panic. His IT team had spent 48 hours trying to exorcise my digital DNA from the mainframe. They were performing brain surgery with garden tools. We deleted the Sullivan user profile completely, the lead programmer reported, eyes bloodshot from screen glare. But every time we reboot to apply changes, the profile regenerates from somewhere. How is that possible? Morrison demanded, crushing his 7th energy drink can. It's a computer, not a zombie movie. It's the system architecture, sir, the kid explained, pulling up a flowchart that resembled spaghetti art. The core bootloader checks for architect's signature on startup. If it doesn't find the master encryption key, it initiates automatic restore from a hidden partition to prevent data corruption. And the master key belongs to Sullivan's personal certificate. The kid confirmed. He didn't just write software patches, he designed the entire operating system foundation. We're trying to renovate a house while the owner still holds the deed. Morrison's face cycled through several colors before settling on gray. Wipe it completely, he whispered. Format the drives, factory reset everything back to manufacturer defaults. Walt Gibson, the veteran electrician, spoke up from his corner. You really don't want to do that, son. Excuse me, Morrison snapped. Factory reset means 1987 baseline settings. Walt explained around his perpetual toothpick. DOS command prompts. Robot arms forget their coordinate systems. You lose decades of calibration data for every machine on this floor. Takes months to rebuild from scratch. I don't care about 1987, Morrison yelled. I have cloud backups of current configurations. The same cloud backup that's been failing to sync because of network latency. Walt asked mildly. Morrison paused, realizing his trap. Do it anyway, he whispered. Burn it all down. The programmer typed the nuclear command with trembling fingers. This action is irreversible. All data will be lost. Proceed YN. He pressed Y like he was launching missiles. Every screen in the control room flickered and died. Out on the factory floor, lights stuttered and cut out. Emergency backup illumination kicked in, bathing everything in hellish orange light. Conveyor systems lurched to a stop, air compressors wound down with dying gasps. Silence. Complete, devastating silence. Morrison smiled, like he'd just conquered a small country. Now boot the new operating system, he ordered triumphantly. The programmer hit the restart sequence. Text crawled across the main display. Booting. Loading OS. Error. Boot device not found. Error. System files corrupted. Error. Architect authorization required. Then a message appeared that made Morrison's blood freeze. Not a system error, but a personal communication routed through the emergency notification system. Message from maintenance ghost. Zach, did you just try to lobotomize my factory? That was incredibly rude. Bob Morrison stared at the screen like it had grown fangs. Trace that signal, he screamed. Call the FBI, call someone, she's in the system. It's not hacking, Walt said, putting on his coat. You tried to break into a house that man built and you triggered every alarm in the place. I'm going home. Call me when you hire a grown-up. The screens went completely black. My phone confirmed the total system shutdown. Morrison had done the unthinkable, nuked his own facility. Now he had nothing. No legacy system, no modern replacement, just millions of dollars of dead machinery and a board meeting scheduled for tomorrow, time to make my entrance. My phone rang Thursday morning at 6:30 a.m., let it go to voicemail twice. At 6:45, text from an unknown number. Name your price. Hoffman, I waited exactly 30 minutes. Professional courtesy, then replied, consulting rate is double my old salary. 6-month minimum contract, and I want a written apology. Not to me, to the machines. Response came immediately, done. How fast can you get here? 2 hours. Touch nothing. I drove back to Detroit, took my time, stopped for real coffee. When I pulled up to the gate, Carl saluted me like I was returning from a successful mission. Welcome back, Chief Sullivan, he said, manually cranking the gate open since electronics were fried, drove up to the main entrance. Hoffman waited outside, looking humble for the first time in his corporate life. Bob, he said, extending his hand. Mr. Hoffman, I nodded, walked past him toward the server room. Let's assess the damage. The server room looked like a war zone lit by flashlights. The IT team stared at me like I was walking on water. Boot sequence, I told the lead programmer. We can't, he admitted. Everything's gone. The drives you can see are wiped, I corrected. Pulled my USB drive from my pocket. Morrison had watched me pack personal files without understanding what he was seeing. I plugged it into the main console. Green status light blinked like a heartbeat. Reading backup. Signature verified. R. Sullivan, decrypting master partition. Restoring factory baseline. Green progress bars filled every monitor. Code cascaded like digital rainfall. Messy, complex, held together with virtual duct tape and determination, but magnificently alive. System restoration complete. The programmer whispered. Calibration data, timing algorithms, safety protocols, it's all returning. I turned to Hoffman. The factory had a stroke. Needs rehabilitation to remember how to function. That'll take me about 10 days of intensive care. Whatever you require, Hoffman agreed without hesitation. Contract consulting rates. I specified $150 per hour, 6-month retainer, and Morrison's corner office becomes a proper break room for floor personnel. With a decent coffee machine. Done, Hoffman said instantly. I faced the keyboard, entered my credentials. Welcome back, Chief Architect, the system greeted me. Roger that, I said, cracking my knuckles. Let's build some automobiles. Bringing the lights back online was straightforward. Rebuilding trust between humans and machines took longer. The next week, I lived on the factory floor, slept on a cot in my new office, survived on coffee that didn't taste like industrial solvent, and treasured every moment. Morrison, security escorted him out Wednesday evening, heard he landed at some transportation company in Cleveland. Give it 8 months before their delivery trucks start driving into ditches. Friday afternoon, the plant achieved 98% operational capacity. We'd missed some critical shipments, but the hemorrhaging had stopped. Hoffman called an all-hands assembly on the factory floor. He stood on a plain wooden crate, humble platform, not an executive podium. I owe everyone an apology, he told the exhausted workers. I listened to the wrong advisor. Thought innovation meant discarding experience. Forgot that wisdom can't be downloaded or purchased. He looked directly at me. Bob has agreed to remain as our chief systems architect. He reports solely to me and holds veto authority over any future technological changes. Real applause erupted. Not polite corporate clapping, genuine cheering from people with motor oil under their fingernails and pride in their chests. But I had one final requirement, Mr. Hoffman. I announced, you owe someone else an apology. I pointed to line 2, the robotic assembly now repaired, but still bearing battle scars. Her. That machine. You allowed a stranger to abuse her. She deserves your respect. The floor went silent. Hoffman looked at me, then at the robot, then at the faces of workers who spent more time with these machines than their own families. Understanding dawned. He approached the safety perimeter, placed his hand on the yellow steel framework. I'm sorry, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Line 2 hissed pneumatically and executed a flawless weld. Sparks arsed in perfect formation. It looked like acceptance. 6 months later, steel point hums with a different rhythm, deeper, more confident. Maybe it's psychological, or maybe it's the upgraded components we installed, but the facility sounds content. Morrison's replacement is a 42-year-old former Marine engineer who actually listens when experienced people explain procedures. I'm in the control center now, overlooking the production floor. Got a mug of coffee that doesn't taste like coolant and monitors displaying every vital sign of the plant in beautiful green text. My apprentice, Danny, recent engineering graduate, walks a group of interns through sensor diagnostics on line 2. Listen to the servo motors, I hear him instructing over the radio. Whining means insufficient lubrication. Clicking indicates misalignment. Smooth humming means optimal performance. Always respect the machinery. Corporate revenge isn't always about financial compensation. Sometimes it's about respect. Sometimes it's about proving that experience matters in a world obsessed with the newest technology. And sometimes it's about protecting something larger than yourself, the knowledge, the craft, the institutional memory that keeps civilization running. This story was about all three. If you've ever been dismissed because of your age, told your skills are obsolete, or watched some young hotshot nearly destroy what you spent decades building, you're not alone. Experience has value. Institutional knowledge matters, and sometimes the old ways work because they've been tested by time and refined by wisdom. Don't let anyone convince you that your years on the job make you expendable. You're not legacy equipment, you're the foundation. Thanks for listening.